It is worth recalling that because from 1950 on, the Soviet threat was the justification for the permanent war economy and the justification for these enormous military expenditures. What does that mean as far as the United States is concerned? Well, it means that we have not addressed or begun to solve the many domestic crises that we all know exist. There's no need really to go through this litany of the worst educational system in the developed world. 1 in 3 in this country illiterate, either totally or to the degree that they cannot function in a society based on the written word. Healthcare, not just the cost, but the fact that 40 million people in this country have no health insurance. The only developed country in the world with no national health plan. And on and on. The fact that only about, 60%, about 2/3 of the eligible voters register to vote. And of those who register, only about 80% actually vote, so only in the end 50% of the eligible voters vote in national elections in this country. And that means that a president is elected with around 24-25% of the potential vote. The litany goes on: the environment, the infrastructure, finding a prevention and cure for AIDS, the violence we see everywhere and in every form in the United States. When you put all these things together, I don't think anyone would argue, add drugs, of course, anyone would argue that we have a domestic society in profound crisis. And the reason why, over all these years, these crises have not been solved is, in my opinion, because those who really control and rule the United States don't want them solved. Imagine what would happen if we had an informed electorate, if we didn't have the worst educational system, if we had a negligible, perhaps, illiteracy rate here. There might be an informed electorate. We might be debating real substantive issues in the electoral process or in the political process in the United States. There might be a threat in this country of real democracy if we solved the domestic crises in this country. People might clamor to participate if there was a real debate. There might be a threat of a third party, I mean a second party, in the United States. There are all kinds of threats to elitist control of the United States if we were to solve these domestic crises, in my opinion. And it is for this reason that we have always needed this foreign threat and this foreign crisis in order to justify putting the money into military expenditures instead of converting the economy once and for all to human purposes. During those 40-odd years of the Cold War, the CIA has been a very important factor or tool or instrument of the President of the United States in waging what is continuing today. This new world order of George Bush, or new international order, seems to me to be nothing more really than the institutionalization of the north-south dimension of the old Cold War. That is, the war against the Third World for control of their natural resources, their labor, and their markets. That is where the fighting really took place, as in Vietnam. This north-south dimension of the Cold War, the war against the Third World, continues today as we sit here with all its racist content. And we and our allies, that is the United States and its allies, are just as dependent, if not more, on the resources of these countries in the Third World as they ever were. And that dependency is not going to disappear. It's going to keep on growing through the years. So what I think Bush has in mind is, through this Persian Gulf crisis, to send a message to any aspiring Third World leader that Third World radical nationalism will not be tolerated. It is a way in which, in fact, we are beginning to treat the Third World, or continuing to treat the Third World, like we treat Third World people right here in the United States. They know their place, they have a role to perform, and they're expected to do it. If they don't, if they make trouble, they're going to be smashed. That is what happened, of course, with Iraq. I believe that Bush encouraged the Hussein administration and Saddam Hussein himself to believe that they could get away with taking over Kuwait with impunity. And there are many signs that point in this direction. Iraq never really formally recognized the independence of Kuwait. They have always claimed that Kuwait was part of Iraq taken away by British imperialism, which is indeed the case. Last April, Assistant Secretary of State John Kelly testified before Congress that the United States had no commitment to defend Kuwait. On July 25th, the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, April Glaspie, meets with Hussein. Among other things, the U.S. ambassador says to Hussein, Mr. President, I have a direct instruction from Secretary of State Baker to emphasize to you that the United States has, quote unquote, no opinion on your disputes with Kuwait, particularly your border disputes with Kuwait. She also said, I have an instruction from President Bush to seek better relations with Iraq. President Hussein, in response, in several places, says that what Kuwait is doing through its overproduction is the equivalent to war against Iraq. They are destroying the Iraqi economy, he said, and we are going to take strong action. He as much as said that they were going to go to war. Well, in this meeting, with those 100,000 troops on the border, not one word from the U.S. ambassador of warning to Hussein not to invade. Well, put all those things together, and you have to ask yourself the question, why did the Bush administration do nothing during that last week between the ambassador's meeting with Hussein and the invasion itself to prevent that invasion? They knew those 100,000 troops were there, but not one word from Glaspie to Hussein about it. My conclusion is that they wanted the invasion, that this was the site selected for the new international crisis that would justify continuation of the war economy in the United States. It was totally avoidable, objectively speaking, but because of the tradition in the United States, after all, we are a warrior culture, we do still live in the age of imperialism, and the demands of this system require this crisis. I go back to the CIA for just a moment because it's worth recalling that the agency from the very beginning in the 1940s, was used not only to collect intelligence from around the world, process it and present it to policymakers like the President for their decisions, or to help them in their decisions. Obviously, that's what an intelligence service should do. But the CIA was used all through these years to subvert the democratic processes of other countries. At the very first meeting of the National Security Council, which was set up in the same law that established the CIA as the National Intelligence Service, this was October 1947, 1 month after Truman signed this bill into law, establishing the CIA and the National Security Council as the highest policy-making body in national security and foreign affairs. At their very first meeting in October 1947, the decision was taken to set aside $10 million for the CIA to intervene secretly in the Italian elections coming up about 6 months later. The CIA was not just used in these electoral operations. You know, the media operations were vast, and I'm sure they still are. Media operations basically means that the CIA pays a foreign journalist to publish the CIA's material as if it were the journalist's own. There were CIA interventions of all sorts, but one area I want to mention of special importance are what are known as liaison operations. Liaison operations are all those activities that the CIA undertakes with the intelligence and security services of other countries. Early on, the CIA began to set up security and intelligence services in other countries for purposes of internal security. One of the first places was Greece. There was a civil war, you know, in Greece in 1947 to 1949. The United States intervened on the side of the far right in Greece, and the U.S. side won. In the aftermath, the CIA set up a security service known as the KYP, or KEEP, KYP being the Greek initials for CIA. They gave it the same name. This security service was used to keep the far right in power in Greece for nearly 20 years. But when that power was threatened with upcoming elections in 1967, the CIA and this service, this KYP, organized a military coup in Greece, which was successful, leading to 7 years of military dictatorship in Greece, of neo-fascist stripe. During that period, torture became an institution in Greece. Thousands of Greeks were forced into exile. I could give you many, many examples of this in Iran, for